You don't really get how things work around here until the day they shove it in your face, literally. That morning, the HOA president, all tight smile and sharper voice, waved a red seal notice inches from my nose. Not a warning, a complete seizure. 31 grand in fines over paint, overgrown trees, and a car that sat too long in my own driveway. Comply or lose your home, she said, like it was just another Tuesday. And just like that, the ground shifted under me. When I'd left for a business trip, my old mountain place was forest green, the color I'd picked because it matched those black and white photos from the 60s when this house was built, back before anyone thought up Ridgerest Mountain Estates, much less the HOA that now ruled over it. I'd barely shut the car off in my driveway before realizing something was wrong. The whole house was now painted this bland, corporate gray cold, dead nothing like what I'd left. The locks had been changed. There was a sticky chemical smell of cheap paint everywhere, and a fat red notice screaming auction next week. My neighbors, always polite, had pegged me as a quiet retiree, an easy mark. What nobody saw coming was the set of documents I kept locked in my safe papers. They hadn't bothered to check. That proved my house wasn't just old, it was untouchable. See, I'd been a federal appellate judge for 15 years, sitting through more parades of human misery than I care to remember. I left that behind, never told a soul in town, not even when I bought the place. To them, I was just Walter Prescott, retired engineer, hoping for peace and a porch with a view. I liked it that way. No headlines, no security details, no one asking what I thought about justice. But old habits die hard, and I started seeing the pattern the moment Margaret Brindley strutted over, hair pulled back like she meant business, navy blazer crisp as ever. Margaret was one of those folks who thought rules existed to be wielded. She'd met me once when I moved in, handed me a binder of HOA bylaws as thick as a dictionary, and then vanished into her world of board meetings and compliance. Now here she was, reading off violations: wrong paint color, tree too tall, car not moved in time, unpaid maintenance fees, which, by the way, weren't even due, emergency procedures, she called it, reading from her folder like she was announcing my execution. She wanted me to protest, to beg, maybe shout. I did none of those. I just nodded, took her paper, and walked away, let her think I was beaten while inside I was already digging into my safe and planning my counterattack. It didn't take long to piece together the scam. The public records were all there. 23 homes seized in 12 years, each one auctioned for a fraction of its value, all snapped up by one company, Summit Peak Properties, LLC. Registered in 2013, address belonged to Dennis Brindley, Margaret's brother. These weren't just random foreclosures, they were methodical, a quiet clearing of the best lots on the mountain, all of it done under the guise of community rules. $2.1 million in profit, and the same families running the show. I found one of their victims, Harold Jennings, holed up in a tiny apartment, his old life boxed up around him. They'd taken his house while he was in the hospital after a stroke. Sold everything inside. The only thing he got back was a wedding photo bought at a secondhand store for $30. Every notice they sent him went to his empty house. No calls, no visits, no chance. 14 days to appeal, and he was in a coma for 3 weeks. The system wasn't broken, it was humming along just as Margaret designed. There were others. People who got sick, got old, lost someone, or just disappeared for a while. Those were the targets. The ones with connections or sharp lawyers. They got payment plans. People like Harold or like me, 7 days and a lock change. But Margaret and her crew didn't know what I had in my safe. The original deed from 1962, a certificate from the state saying my house was a heritage site, legally protected, immune from the rules she was using to strip folks of their homes. I spent a sleepless night with hotel coffee and public records mapping out the pattern, the paper trail. And then I hit the real jackpot, a proposal for a $47 million luxury resort on the exact strip of land those houses used to stand on. The Brindley Family Trust held the biggest stake. Their lawyer was the same guy who'd written the HOA rules. And still, she didn't see it coming. Margaret thought she could scare me off by accelerating the auction, cutting the timeline in half. She even had her brother watching me from his truck outside my hotel, making sure the retiree wasn't up to anything. But intimidation only works on folks who have something to hide. I didn't hide, I gathered evidence. Photos of the damaged paint samples and the kicker security camera footage from my neighbor Arthur, who caught Dennis Brindley supervising the paint job while I was out of state. Not just a contractor following orders, Dennis personally overseeing the destruction of a protected property. With everything in hand, I started making calls, the State Preservation Office, the victims I'd tracked down, and Sarah Whitman at the Denver Post, who'd spent years reporting on HOA abuses. The clock was ticking 3 days until auction. Margaret was counting on the system to protect her, but the system was about to meet a judge who knew where all the bodies were buried. Auction day. The Ridgerest Community Hall was packed, board members, investors, residents, even the sheriff. Margaret started the meeting all fake poise and rehearsed authority until I stood up. One by one, I laid out the documents, deed, HOA formation records showing my house was never part of their jurisdiction, the state preservation certificate, the statute with a $50,000 fine per violation. Then the video footage Dennis caught trespassing, vandalizing protected property. Margaret's lawyer tried to brush it off, but the sheriff stopped him cold. "I'm going to need you to halt these proceedings." For the first time, Margaret looked scared. Not angry scared. Her counsel backed away, and the crowd neighbors who'd been silent for years watched her stand alone. She tried threats, name-dropped the DA commissioners, anyone who'd listen. No one moved. She walked out trailed by a deputy, but even then she hissed at me. "You think you've won? I've buried better men than you." The press was there, cameras rolling. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Not just a local scandal, a national example of HOA abuse. Margaret tried to spin it, hired PR, but then she lost her temper on camera, blaming problem people for making her job impossible. That was it. That's all anyone needed to hear. "These people are problems" became the headline that sank her. Soon after, the Colorado Attorney General opened a formal investigation. The IRS followed the money, and Margaret's network of allies started to crumble. Board members began jumping ship, turning over internal emails. Financial records evidence that showed they'd been targeting residents by age, health, lack of connections, anyone least likely to fight back. The last act played out at a standing-room-only community meeting. Margaret tried to reclaim control, but the dam broke voices from all sides. Stories of stolen homes and ruined lives. Harold stood up, shaky but steady, and told everyone what she'd done to him and his late wife. Margaret snapped. "I did what had to be done, and I'd do it again." That's what the camera caught, and that's what finished her. Sheriff Hollister moved in. Margaret and Dennis were led away, no one coming to their defense. The room stayed silent, that heavy-loaded silence you get when a long injustice finally gets named for what it is. 6 months later, I was back at the courthouse, this time not as a judge, just a witness to the sentencing. The evidence was overwhelming: 23 counts of fraud, 5 of tax evasion, 1 violation of the State's Preservation Act. Margaret got 12 years, Dennis 8. Richard Thornton, the lawyer, lost his license and took probation to testify against the others. 7 families got their homes back. The HOA dissolved. A new state law was moving through the legislature, so nobody could ever use community rules to take someone's home without a court order again. I went home, restored the old forest green paint, rehung the house number sign I'd found tossed in a dumpster. The numbers faded, but still there, 847. The place was quiet, peaceful, the way I'd wanted it. 15 years on the bench taught me justice isn't perfect, but sometimes it shows up. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to follow the trail and refuse to be afraid. Margaret thought her power was untouchable, but she forgot power without accountability is just waiting for someone to call its bluff. Tonight, the mountains glowed gold, then faded to black. My house, my home was mine again, and no one was going to take it away. One old document. That's all it took to bring down 12 years of greed. Makes you wonder how many folks out there are living on land they think is safe, just waiting for someone like Margaret to decide otherwise. Maybe you know your rights. Maybe you don't. Either way, this isn't just a story. It's a warning. And maybe a reminder that sometimes justice does show up. So what do you think? Is there ever a line where protecting the community just becomes taking from the vulnerable? Can a system that works this way ever really be fixed? Or is it always going to find new ways to feed itself? Drop your thoughts below. Share your stories. Let's make sure the next time power comes knocking, it finds more than silence waiting on the porch.